For the first 5 years of the life of the band Fleetwood Mac, they recorded 8 albums made with 8 different versions of the band. And if you think that's pretty amazing, and it is, you got to remember that this is Fleetwood Mac. And so the drama just keeps coming. Now, in this episode, we're going to look at what they do in the next 3 years. There's going to be some more changes. Of course there is. It's Fleetwood Mac, so let's drop the needle. Now, if you remember from the last episode, the band had broken up, and their manager was upset about this, so he created a new Fleetwood Mac, new members, sent them out on the road, and that was a disaster. Well, while all this was going on, Bob Welch decided to stay in LA. He really wanted to figure out a way to get the name Fleetwood Mac back, and he wanted to record with the real Fleetwood Mac. So he went to Bill Graham and said, I need your help in convincing Warner Brothers that the real Fleetwood Mac is Mick Fleetwood, John McVie, Christine McVie, and Bob Welch. And so they did, and Warner Brothers decided they were correct. Based on the success of being re-signed by Reprise, the first thing that Fleetwood Mac does is they decide, we don't want another manager. That was a mess. So they became one of the first acts to manage themselves. And then they went into the studio and recorded their 9th studio album, Heroes Are Hard to Find. It was released in February of 1974. I like the title track, Heroes Are Hard to Find, Coming Home, Angel, Come a Little Bit Closer, Prove Your Love, and Safe Harbor. Although there are no hit singles on this album, it did prove who the real Fleetwood Mac was, at least for a little bit. After the album came out, Bob Welch decided he's burned out, and so he decides to leave the band. And now Mick Fleetwood is in that position again of trying to find a replacement. But here's an interesting story for you. Back in the late 60s and into the 70s, I was a disc jockey in Los Angeles. And I started out working at a college radio station, but then I transferred to the top FM underground station in the market in LA. It was a very, very heady time. But what was going on during that time is there was a promotion man at RCA Records who thought it would be a great idea to get young upcoming bands and have them come into the studio and invite a bunch of the disc jockeys down to meet the band and have the band perform, with the idea that the disc jockeys would like the band and therefore play their records on the radio, therefore generating sales. So I got to go to a number of those events. In an earlier episode where I talked about Mike Nesmith, I talked about how after the Monkees fell apart and he formed the First National Band, how he did one of these promotion things in the studio, and we all went and met him, and he was great, and he was a terrific person to meet. Well, that wasn't always the case, because I went to one of these events and they brought in 2 musicians who were really, in my opinion, nothing special. The guy was extremely arrogant, and the woman was shy and retiring, like, she's never going to make it on stage. But for some reason, both of them felt that they were already established stars, and we should be kowtowing to them and promoting their records. It was a very, very weird situation. And after they left, and like I said, they weren't really that good. And after they left, the disc jockeys were all talking among ourselves. Basically, the feeling was we all hated the 2 musicians and their music, and we couldn't wait to leave the studio, and none of us were going to play their songs on the radio. But there was one person who did like their music. Now, the 2 musicians had been in a band earlier called Fritz, and it didn't really go anywhere. But they decided they'd record an album on their own, and that album was called Buckingham Nicks. Yeah, those 2 musicians were Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks. And here's the cover of the album. And on the cover, you can see that Stevie is posing nude. And she has said she hated that. She was forced into do it. She didn't want to do it. But she was young and just starting her career. And so here's the cover of what is really not a very good album. Here are the tracks that are on the album. Some were written by Stevie, some were written by Lindsey. And as I say, not particularly very good. But there's one track on this album called Frozen Love, and there was one person who heard that track and went, oh boy, that guitarist is great. And that person was Mick Fleetwood. So he calls up Lindsey Buckingham and says, Lindsey, I want you to join Fleetwood Mac. And Lindsey says, you know, I'll do it, but I'll do it on one condition. You have to hire my girlfriend, Stevie Nicks. And Mick Fleetwood agrees. And with the addition of Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks, we now have a lineup which is Mick Fleetwood, John McVie, Christine McVie, Stevie Nicks, and Lindsey Buckingham. And this is the lineup that when you say the name Fleetwood Mac, most people think of. They pretty much define Fleetwood Mac in a lot of ways. This lineup is called the classic lineup, and it certainly is responsible for the majority of their hits and success. But as you've seen in the previous episodes, there was a lot that happened before Lindsey and Stevie joined the group. And of course, there's going to be a lot more that happens now that they are part of the group and after both of them, at different times, under different circumstances, leave the group. So they go to the studio now with a new lineup and start recording their next album, which is going to be simply called Fleetwood Mac. To say it was a hit is an understatement. The new Fleetwood Mac proved to be more successful than any previous incarnation. It contained 3 hit singles in the US, Over My Head, Rhiannon, and Say You Loved Me. But radio stations also loved Landslide. Now, as usual, I've created a Spotify playlist where you can listen to some of the songs that I've talked about in this episode. And here's the link, and I'll also put it in the comments below. So now Fleetwood Mac has a big hit album on their hands, but as you know, this is a band that doesn't handle success all that well because the band is in a lot of turmoil. John McVie and Christine McVie's marriage is falling apart. And Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham's relationship is falling apart. And Mick Fleetwood is divorcing his wife, Jenny Boyd. So there's a lot of turmoil inside the band. So in this period, they actually released 2 albums, Heroes Hard to Find with Bob Welch, and then with Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks, Fleetwood Mac. But as you can tell, with Fleetwood Mac, there's always going to be more drama. So thanks for watching. Wait till next time, and keep a rockin'. If you liked this episode, hit the like button, and you can also leave me a comment down below, and I'll respond to you. If you subscribe, we'll let you know when future episodes come out.